Good morning. It is good to see all the brave who carried through the storm to get here. It is the fall, and leaves are changing from their ordinary but beautiful lush greens of summer into a vibrant, dazzling array of brown and greenish tans. It is a time where we get short bursts of California-like weather and try as often as we can to eat outside. Stores are beginning to roll out the preludes to their Christmas decorations and merchandise, and help wanted signs are going up for the holiday shopping season. Anyone who filed income tax extensions in the spring have to wrap that up in the fall. This is when we elect our local, state, and national representatives. School is back in full swing, with parents scrambling to earn their volunteer hours, working in concession stands, setting up cross-country meets, and chaperoning 17-hour-long band competitions. Seniors that are in high school are already making their applications to their college. Next spring will be too late. This is the time when manufacturing companies are trying to make their year, and the push to make deliveries creates what economists call the hockey stick effect, ramping up overtime and long work hours. I met a friend of mine at a JV football game this past Thursday who's a manager at a theater in the Woodlands. He said to me with a small amount of pride, but an even more noticeable amount of relief, "I got my budget done and turned in this afternoon." Fall is that time of year when we are scrambling to make the budget of the current year and trying to peer through the future to derive our budgets for the next. It is also the time of the year when we, the church, kick off our annual stewardship campaign and ask for pledges, because we too are scrambling to make the year and putting our budgets together for next year. All of these coincide to make the fall about the busiest time of the year across our country. Government, family, work, church, holidays, school. There is no time of year which better exhibits how compartmentalized we see our lives. I'm going to set aside this part of my time and or money for Caesar, and this part for work, and this part for family, and this part for the retail stores and holiday shopping, and this part for the school district, and this part for God, and this part for ... What ties that all together? How do we make sense of the rat race derived from temporal demands of the nation, school district, culture, a class? For the last few weeks, the appointed readings for our gospel have been set with Jesus' teaching in the temple in Jerusalem, uninvited and for the most part unwelcomed by those in charge of the goings-on in the temple. The interchange we heard today is the first of three, in which various authorities, through seemingly benign, thoughtful questions, tried to trap Jesus into saying something that will get him thrown out by the crowds or disposed of by the Romans. "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality." Jesus' opponents open their ploy with empty flattery. "Tell us, is it lawful or not? Not by Roman law or state law, but by the law of the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it lawful or not to pay taxes to Caesar?" Now, the tax in question here is the census tax on agriculture and personal property. The Jews resented this tax and objected to it on religious grounds, claiming that it's tantamount to idolatry. The currency used to pay the tax, the denarius that Jesus asked for, the currency used to pay the tax had the graven image of Caesar himself on it, with the inscription, "The Son of God, the Great High Priest." When the tax was imposed in 6 AD, there was an armed revolt led by a man named Judas from Galilee. 60 years later, the Zealots would lead another revolt against this tax and all that it represented in a war for independence that eventually led to the downfall of Jerusalem and its destruction. The question was a loaded question and a hot-button item. Jesus and his buddies from Galilee were not subject to this particular tax, but the crowds around them in Jerusalem were. To say yes would immediately raise their ire. To say no would mark him as a revolutionary from Galilee and raise the immediate attention of Rome. Jesus refused to answer the question. Instead, he asked them for a tax coin. They unsuspectingly reached into their pockets and withdrew the evidence that exposed them, not him. They are the ones carrying around Caesar's money, not Jesus. They are the ones who have the emperor's image in their pockets. They are the ones who have bought in to the system, whose belongings bear the mark and inscription of Caesar. Give back to Caesar that which is Caesar's. It's already in your pockets. Then came the zinger. But give back to God what is God's. They had already surrendered themselves to the temporal claims of an empire. C.S. Lewis, in his essay, Learning in Wartime, it's an excellent essay. In his essay, Learning of Wartime, he writes of an obligation that one has to their country. He says, a man may have to die for our country, but no man must, in any exclusive sense, live for his country. He who surrenders himself without reservation to the temporal claims of a nation or a party or a class, as rendering to Caesar that which of all things most emphatically belongs to God, that is himself. In this essay, he asserts that Christianity does not make claim to replace the ordinary, mundane parts of life. The volunteering at school, the working the extra hours of the fall hockey stick season, making vacation plans to visit family at Thanksgiving and Christmas, even shopping and budgets and paying taxes. All of our natural activities, he says, will be accepted if they are offered to God. And all of them, even the most noble, will be sinful if we do not. In other words, Christianity does not replace the natural lives in which we find ourselves with all of its temporal demands. Rather, it reorganizes them and orients them to something beyond. This may cause us to change our priorities or to make sacrifices. But there is no fundamental quarrel with spiritual life and human activity. You are the children of God. We bear God's image in ourselves and the inscription of his truth. Children of God, priests of the eternal covenant. Give all that you have, and all that you are, and all that you do in the busy fall season to God. In other words, try to decompartmentalize how you see your life and make it all one offering to God of yourselves, your souls, and bodies. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, to your boss what is your boss's, to your country what is your country's. But do not give anything of yourself to any of those things unless you are giving it to God. Because what is rightfully and emphatically God's is yourself, including all the mundane things you naturally do in life. Fall is our stewardship season because we are trying to plan what we are doing in 2018. We ask you to pledge because it is by your pledge that we can plan so that we can be stressed out next fall as we are trying to make our budget and plan for the next year, and it goes on forever, over and over. I ask you to pledge because it is by your pledge that you make the first fruits of yourself, the first fruits of your accomplishment in your life through your work and labor to God. Pledging and giving to your church is not really about our need to plan for the coming year. If that's all that it was about, then all you would be doing is giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. Pledging and giving to your church is the first step in orienting the accomplishments of your daily mundane labors in gratitude to God. It is giving to God what is God's, not your money, but rather your pledge of yourself. It is an act of gratitude and recognition that by God's grace you produce what you produce, whatever that is. And in giving a portion of your income, you give it all. When you think about making a pledge to Good Shepherd, do not think of it as fulfilling one of your necessary compartments. Instead, realize that when you give your gift, given without a sense of obligation or there being an economic exchange of something coming back to you in return, that your gift given joyfully and freely is an acknowledgement to the reign of God in your life. That all things which are enabled by the accomplishments of your labor, from buying a car for your family to buying a poor person something to eat, is all giving to God as well. I ask you to pledge to Good Shepherd in the hope that we will touch and transform lives in accordance with God's will for our mission. And as your rector, I promise you, when you give to Good Shepherd, I will do all in my power to ensure that we are rendering unto God all that we do, and not simply trying to keep the lights on. That we will see to the care of our grounds and our buildings, of our common life together and growth with a single mission, constantly reorienting ourselves toward Jesus Christ, to a King who, unlike Caesar, poured himself out for the sake of the life of the world. Following that King, all that we do is pouring ourselves out for the sake of the life of the world around us. That is my pledge. Rendering unto God all that is God's.